welcome everybody to this webinar. We're going to talk about right-sizing your SAP migration strategy. There's going to be three of us talking through this presentation. There's myself, Graham Mead. I'm Commercial Director for Proceed. I've got David Lloyd, the Director for Grey Monarch. And then we also have Rob Ashby, who's the Technical Lead for BlackDog, and John Walsh as well from BlackDog as well, who's a Director. And this is a joint audit process that we've built, and we've all got some material that we wanted to show and explain. So just to go through what we're going to talk about today, we're going to do some introductions. Obviously, I've introduced the presenters, but we're also going to just introduce ourselves as each individual organisation. And then I'm going to talk about the joint audit for SAP customers. Then David will talk a little about, from Grey Monarch, we'll talk about the license usage approach that we take. I will then be back to me again, where I'll talk about data management and right sizing. And then we'll hand over to Rob Ashby, who will talk one about the infrastructure application strategy, and then obviously go into the audit report. So hopefully we haven't got any specific times on this, and hopefully there'll be a free flowing, and then we'll have a bit of a Q&A at the end. So let me move forward with the first slide. So just a little about Proceed Group. We're a specific focused organisation. We're just focusing on archiving, decommissioning of SAP system and content management of enterprise systems. So we're a very niche organisation. We've been doing archiving in this area for the last 20 years. We have 650 plus customers worldwide and always growing. We're spread pretty much across the world. We're headquarters in UK. We have offices in the US, Belgium, Germany, South Africa, and India. And we've also just opened a new office in Canada. We're very strong partnerships. Obviously, we've got BlackDog. But obviously we have partnerships with Easy Software, Microsoft, VirtuStream, etc. We're a SAP Gold partner, and we have a master service agreement with SAP, which means we can engage directly with a lot of their customers. We help SAP with pre-sales delivery, but obviously we sell directly to ourselves, and we have taken 100 plus customers into the SAP HANA space, and obviously saved a large amount of money for those customers. There's a few of our customers below that you may or may not have heard of in the past, and there's many more. Okay, so that's just a little bit about Proceed. I'm now going to hand over to David, and he'll talk to you about Grey Monarch. Over to you, David.
Many thanks, Graham. Yes, just a reminder, my name is David Lloyd. I'm a director at Grey Monarch. We've been around since 2008, and we're a specialist SAP partner and a vendor of the Profile Tailor suite of products. So the Profile Tailor suite of products consists of Profile Tailor Dynamics, which is mainly around SAP security, and Profile Tailor License Auditor, which is around SAP license optimization, asset management, and preparing for audit for SAP licenses. We've got around 70 plus UK customers, plus a few more overseas, some very much in common with Proceed, so the likes of Diageo, Mars, Prince's Foods, Clark's. There's no particular part, segment of the UK market or worldwide market that we focus in on. You can see that we've got banks, retailers, utility companies, all sorts. Our main expertise is really in SAP security cleansing and control, active threat detection of SAP license optimization, which of course is the main part of what we're going to be talking about today, and also employee lifecycle automation. With these four things, they might appear to be quite different, but actually at the very heart of these four items is Profile Tailor Suite, and really what we're looking at is SAP user account behavior profiling. So our software monitors the behavior and activity of every single SAP account, whether that's a named user, whether it's a system account, even RFC accounts connected to third-party systems. And because we're constantly monitoring the activity and behavior of those accounts, we can do numerous things with that information. So we can do access cleansing, audit, and control. So because we understand what an account can do, what access and authorizations it holds, we can understand the capabilities of an account. But because we're also monitoring the actual activity of those accounts, we can also do comparisons and say, okay, well, we can see what the account can do, but we can also see what they're actually using out of those authorizations. So that allows us to do very rapid cleansing. It allows us to even look at things like segregation of duties in very different ways. Most companies tend to look at it in a static way. So could somebody create a vendor, and could somebody make a payment to that vendor? So I've just seen this question there. Is there any audio? Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you fine. So,
yeah, I can hear very clearly.
Attendee 17 is not able to hear for some reason. Okay, so I'll continue. That's fine. So yeah, so we can do some quite unique things because we're monitoring actual activity. So things like segregation of duties, we can't just detect whether somebody could perhaps create a vendor and make a payment to the vendor. We can actually see whether they're using that capability as well. Additionally, just moving on, we can also use our active real-time behavior profiling to detect potential threats and fraud within a company. So we could, for instance, because of our monitoring, tell you if somebody's gone and used direct table access in SAP and maybe they've tried to download your customer data or employee data. So we can do this kind of thing by account monitoring. And then more relevant to today, we can also use this information to optimize SAP licenses, which I'll talk about in far more detail later. But obviously, with SAP licenses, people's entitlement that you give them might not actually match what they do with the license. So because we can use this comparison, then we can do a lot with license optimization and monitoring of third-party systems. And finally, we use this information for employee lifecycle automation. So we've got a workflow tool, automation tool, but because we can detect and monitor changes, not just in activity when accounts are doing certain things, we can use them as triggers. So if an employee moves from one department to another, we could trigger maybe an access review process. We can automate leaver processes. We can automate SAP license classification processes. So at the very heart of this is all this account behavior profiling, which allows us to do all of these other different things. So I'll come back to that, the licensing piece in more detail later. So I'll pass over to Rob.
Yeah, thank you, David. Hello, everyone. Rob Ashby from BlackDog Cloud Technologies. We are a reasonably new player to the industry, but with lots of SAP experience in our background. We are providers of cloud advice and strategic information. So we want to help customers move their mission criticals to the cloud, or even to just decide actually that might not be the right fit for me. However, we'll come up with a solution to work with you. We partner with the other hyperscalers as well, but we remain cloud neutral, which is something we pride ourselves on. And we're a technology partner, SAP, and also proud to partner with Proceed and Grey Monarch here today, and hopefully you like this audit service. I'll be focusing in on the infrastructure part of the audit and how we get the benefits out.
Okay. Great, thanks Rob. Okay, so we take back control. So yeah, so as you can see, Proceed, Grey Monarch and BlackDog, we have three very different specialities, but we've come together really to provide a joint audit as regards to touch all those key aspects of any migration to either new infrastructure or cloud, etc. The fact is that you need to get yourself into the right place before you move and have the right strategy going forward to make sure you optimize that new technology. So what we've come up with as a high-level audit process, just for you to understand why we've put this together and what we think the benefits are. So what does the process do? What do we need to do to be able to deliver you a report of how we can improve your world? So obviously we need some data. We need to gather information both from current infrastructure, from what licenses you're using, from our perspective, from Proceed, how you're using that data, you know, etc. And then we would obviously need some workshops to understand a little bit more once we've had a little bit of a dig around, ask some questions, specifically focus on the business goals, i.e. what's the intention of the target solution? You know, are you looking at new technology in the cloud? Are you moving to S/4HANA, etc. And then we document our recommendations, and those recommendations would cover all aspects of what we've gleaned from that data. We not only on your active systems, but also on any inactive systems, any decommissioning which may be required. And then once we've delivered that report, we would obviously follow up on via specific projects, i.e. what from those recommendations, what those projects would mean and how they would be delivered. So that's the essence of what we would the joined up thinking as regards to produce the audit itself. But what are the goals of the audit? Now, there's lots of good information will come out of your audit. You know, it will help you understand what your SAP strategy is. You may not have looked at S/4HANA because you've always deemed it as being too expensive. May well change your strategy. You might be looking at hardware refreshes, which you can then now resize properly. You can reduce hosting costs if you're going to cloud. Future S4, obviously, as I said, it's future S4 customers. You could have fixed licensing issues, fixed SLA issues, etc. So there's data compliance. There's lots of potential savings or areas that you could be optimizing. I could go to more and more detail as regards to what they could be. Obviously, that will depend on the focus of the business and what the areas that needs to be addressed first. But at the end of the day, you'll have a strategy and you have a plan. So let's get back control. So how do we do this? What do we do? So we've broken it down into basically 6 areas of analysis. Okay, so the A through to F, or 1 through to 6, depending on how you look at it. And we can provide obviously there's more and more detail of what is in each part of these processes. First part is licensing, just what David was talking about from Grey Monarch. Licensing is obviously a huge part of an investment into any SAP system, and and SAP and non-SAP as well. You know, your whole landscape will be littered with licensing. So we perform a deep analysis as regards to, or an analysis of your current SAP licenses and your inventories, etc. I won't go into super detail because David's going to be talking that in a lot more detail later on. We also look at your part B is your data management archiving. This is something that Proceed do. We run an assessment or sort of a health check to best understand how we could improve the data management with the systems, reduce its size, and rationalize data which isn't required from a regulatory perspective, etc. The next part is looking at SAP support. Obviously, the increase in SAP support is growing and growing as your systems grow, especially off-prem. You know, this is looking at potentially moving to cloud, and reduce the size of that support cost, etc. Take away that heavy lifting from you to people who could support it more cost-effective way. We then look at the SAP application strategy. What's your strategy going forward? You know, like I said earlier, are you going S4, or are you staying on-prem, off-prem, etc. And then that then leads into the SAP infrastructure. What infrastructure is the best to optimize your needs? And make sure that you're getting the most from your infrastructure, if it be on-prem or off-prem. And then spend on SAP. So all these brought together, obviously you can imagine, you look at your licensing, you're looking at the size of your systems, you're looking at the support from SAP. You can then drive the spend on SAP further down to a more optimized approach. So that then all feeds in, finally obviously feeds into your audit report, which you could then look at as being a business case or whatever. But then it starts you on that journey to affect change and affect your future. So that's the real focus on the 6 areas. So I'll just take back control. Okay, so the first key area we talked about was the licensing usage. So I'm going to hand over to David, and he's going to talk a little bit more about the licensing. Over to you, David.
Great. Thank you very much, Graham. So really, as part of this high-level audit, Grey Monarch are looking to achieve 2 things for you. Firstly is to look at how you could potentially optimize the value of your current license bill of materials or your license estate. So maximizing that value is an incredibly important thing, not just for now in terms of remaining compliant within your license, but especially if you are planning to move to S/4HANA, because a process of value exchange takes place where your current bill of materials has a certain value, and that's exchanged for a new bill of materials for S/4HANA. And a value exchange takes place, and that's calculated. There's very different license types in S/4HANA. I'll come back to that in a second. But secondly, the whole right-sizing of your bill of materials, understanding what you have right now in your bill of materials, what you actually use, what you don't use, what you might take forward, doesn't just have an effect on your SAP license, but also the other things which Graham and Rob will be talking about in terms of your infrastructure size, your HANA database size, the amount of data, etc. So this graphic that you can see in front of you might be familiar to you all already, because it's actually an SAP graphic. It's not a Grey Monarch graphic, but it very neatly shows you the only 3 ways that SAP license anything right now. The most common, which you'll all be very familiar with, is direct human access, so named user licenses. So these come in various forms, most commonly professional licenses, limited professional licenses, employee ESS licenses. Some of you might have some specially negotiated licenses like shop floor licenses or warehouse licenses. But effectively, these kind of licenses is 1 license per human who is accessing your SAP system. Now, like many things like this, is that over time, these become a little bit muddled. So you might have a new user come along and you expect them to be creating purchase orders in your system, and they need a professional license. Over time, that employee might move jobs, might not be doing purchase orders anymore, and very few companies have got good enough joiner mover leaver processes to actually keep track of license usage over time. And the net effect of this is that most companies are way over licensed with their named user licenses. Occasionally, we might see some compliance issues where they're under licensed, but generally speaking, most companies are over licensed. And it's because that they've given the highest license classification, i.e. a professional license, to people who actually, when you look at their real activity, no longer need that license, never used it, never log on, and those can be put back into the value pot. If you're moving to S/4HANA, getting the correct mix of these licenses is doubly important, because if you've got a lot of limited professional licenses right now, which are cheaper than professional ones, a limited professional license does not exist in S/4HANA. They will automatically be rolled up to a professional license. Hence, you're going to get less value for them. So it's exceptionally important to make sure that these type of licenses are optimized. And this is one of the things that we do as part of this high-level audit, is to see what potential there is for optimizing these. And hopefully, not only would we optimize these, but get a lot of value back into the pot for you. The second way that SAP license is through digital access. Now, this is a relatively new license type from SAP. It was only introduced in April 2018, so it's only just over 2 years old, this method of licensing. Prior to a digital access license, there was what was known as indirect access. So any system that you connected to SAP, whether it be a third-party CRM system or any Internet of Things system, that system, whoever was using that as a human on the end of it, also needed an SAP license. So to take a fairly simple example, if you connected, for instance, Salesforce.com into your SAP system, and the people using Salesforce.com were indirectly creating, say, new sales documents or changing sales documents in an SAP system, albeit automated through an interface, they would still require a direct human access license, because that was all that existed as a license mechanism for those kinds of users. This led to a lot of companies getting into quite serious problems with their licenses, and some legal cases where this indirect access was taking place. So to alleviate this, SAP did bring out this digital access license in 2018, and this is effectively counting documents being created. So instead of just human access, it will count documents being created of a certain type. There's 9 types. Things like creating purchase orders, sales documents, etc. So you can connect third-party systems, and they can create and change these documents up to a certain threshold of which you would be licensed for. SAP are very keen to get people who have any kind of indirect access right now onto the new digital access license. And in fact, they have a digital access adoption program, which was due to expire actually this summer. It's now been extended until 31st of December 2021. And if you have any kind of indirect access exposure now, which you're not licensed for, then you could potentially move to a digital access license before the end of 2021. And SAP will effectively pardon you, forgive you for previous indirect access, and you'll be on a new access license. Now, one of the important things right now that you can do is at least check that you do not have any indirect access that you're not licensed for. So as part of this audit, we can also give you a good steer on that. We'll be able to do some sort of monitoring to check that your third-party systems that are connected to your SAP system, we can get a good view on whether they're causing indirect access and what kind of a license exposure you might have to that indirect access. We can also do mitigation as well. This generally tends to be a much deeper audit, where we can look at that indirect access and start looking at the third-party systems and checking if those people have actually got equivalent SAP licenses. What we can also do in this area is we can provide, if you are looking at purchasing a digital access license from SAP in the future, before the end of next year, we can also do more accurate document counts than SAP do. So right now, if you're looking for digital access license, you can upgrade your SAP system and install what's called a passport. This passport will start to do document counts of your system to predict your license requirements for a digital access license. There is a few potential issues with the way that SAP count that. So they start to count total documents, and they don't look to also eliminate the documents already being created by humans. So there's a potential that you are going to end up with a much bigger digital access license than you actually need. So we can actually, because we're doing far more accurate usage analysis, we can provide you with a much more accurate digital access document count. The third way that SAP license their products is through application access. So these kind of applications are either purchased straight off, or a metric is applied which gives you a calculation of the price. These metrics tend to come in two flavors, either a technical metrics, so something like the number of CPUs, the size of the database, the amount of gigabytes being transferred, say for SAP PI, or they could be business metrics. Business metrics tend to be the amount of revenue you have, the number of employees you have, maybe number of master records in certain systems. So these are how SAP applications tend to be licensed in these metrics. Now, one of the relevant things here is that when you start to look at application access, then anything you can do in the way of archiving and reducing the amount of data, number of master records, the sizes of these things is going to have a knock-on effect in the future, not just to your licensing, but all the things that Graham and Rob are going to be talking about in terms of sizing for infrastructure. So these kind of licenses are also worth reviewing. Now, fourthly and lastly, one license which is not in SAP's graphic here is the actual HANA database license itself. And this is very relevant to our conversation today in terms of sizing and moving forward. So the HANA database can be licensed in two ways. There's a full use license or a runtime license. Now, a full use license is licensed on the amount of gigabytes of memory that HANA database can use. And I think these generally come in blocks of 64 gigabytes. So anything you can do if you have a HANA database full use license, anything you can do to reduce the amount of memory that you need through archiving and sizing and optimization is going to reduce the license cost that you have. The second way that SAP licensed the HANA database is through a runtime license, which is calculated, it's called HSAV, HANA SAP application value. And it's based on the total of your SAP bill of materials, and it's usually a percentage of around 15% of that. And it allows you only to use the HANA database for SAP applications, but it's basically based on the sizing of your bill of materials. So again, it very much corresponds to all the optimization you can do in terms of your license right now. Your bill of material right now will have a direct effect on the knock-on costing of your HANA database as you go forward. So as part of this initial audit that we are proposing as part of this campaign of our partners is really to look at that whole licensing, what you're licensed for now, find areas where we can optimize the license to make sure that you are getting the maximum value for your license and also ensuring that you don't have any compliance issues in the future. And I'll now hand back to Graham.
Thank you, David. It's very, very interesting stuff, that. I just can see I'll get back control. So, there we go. Right, okay, so I'm going to touch a little bit on SAP data management and right sizing. So specifically focusing in on the data. Okay, so the analogy that we always use, and I think a few of you may have attended some of our previous webinars will recognize this slide. We always look at the analogy that, you know, moving to HANA or moving to the cloud is like moving from a 5-bedroom house that you've lived in for the last 10 years to a small luxury studio flat. So you have to make some decisions. You have to clear out the garage. Actually, I'm doing a house move at the moment, so I know exactly how this feels. Clear out the loft, rationalize everything you have, you know, get rid of things you just don't need anymore. And then when you move in, you've got to make some decisions on which what do you actually need to live in the flat. You know, how many beds do you need, how many sofas do you need, how many TVs you need, and the rest you have to put back into storage. So that's the analogy we always use, and it's very, very true. With your SAP systems, you will always have lots of things that you can get rid of, and it's also lots of things you can put into storage that you only need if you need them, i.e. you archive the data. So I'll just get back to control. So this is a typical example. You have this is from a customer's data. Their ECC system's been growing over a number of years up to about 25 terabytes. And then this is the effect of moving into HANA. HANA, obviously, you get a certain level of compression, around 50%. So that was the target would have been, that would go down to something like a 9 to 10 terabyte HANA system. But they would, because they haven't introduced any data management or growth management strategies, they continue to grow again. So, within 10 years, or not even 10 years, within 5 years, they're back to where they started again, and they're in a very expensive environment. So what we would always look at is focus in and work to remove all the data that's no longer needed, archive data which is only needed on the rare occasions, and so therefore the HANA system has only really got the active data within the solution. And then with proper data management, you keep them at a low growth record. So within that same period, you may have grown slightly out of the box you originally decided on, but you can obviously introduce additional archiving to keep it below there, but that would always be the target. That's the sort of effect you can have. So how do we start? We do a data audit, and this will be part of the audit that we're going to be talking about, which I'll show you an example of that. Essentially, we extract some simple data out of your SAP system. We analyze that information, and then we look at the areas that we can affect, and then we obviously would report that as part of the audit. What would a typical audit report look like? Well, this is an example of an audit report we've done it a couple of weeks ago. So as you can see, it is immediately identified that they have significant amounts of data compared to the size of the system in the FICO, in basis, and in sales and distribution. Now, this is normally quite typical, and especially in the basis area. So that's what we talk about housekeeping. We would immediately say this is a housekeeping activity to get the information out. With the FICO and the SD, we would need to engage with the business to understand better as regards to what's called residency periods and retention periods, i.e. how long you need to keep the data in the active system, and how old can the data be before you actually start physically deleting it. It also identifies some other interesting things. We've got SAP Office documents here. That's clearly means that they're storing SAP Office documents in their main ECC database. There are some techniques that we have where you can move that data out into a content store, and all SAP Office documents go to that content store. So we take the data out and we keep it out, i.e. we no longer store the data in the SAP system. It becomes very important when you move to an S4 into cloud, especially S4. It's very expensive to have basically SAP attachments in your SAP system. So what does it look like in more detail? This is a detailed breakdown of this customer's data by module. Okay, so just the things that I'd like to pick up on this. This is the total size of the data that we would eligible potentially to be archiving, is around 2 terabytes. This is the amount of data that we would look at to be archived, and obviously it's significantly less, and I'll talk about that in 2 seconds. What we can then do is look at the age of the system, look at retention policies. These are broad brush, sort of best business practice, and then we look at what can be retained and what we can archive. Now, obviously, what it immediately tells us again, what we can achieve within the basis area, what we can achieve in FICO, and what we can achieve in SD as well, which is down here. Now, that's an important focus. So that helps with the audit report for us to focus in and provide recommendations of what data could be archived as low-hanging fruit quickly and easily. The bit that I just want to touch on here, this syslobs here, that at the moment isn't eligible for archiving. That is all their Office documents. So obviously we can do some significant impact on the fact that we can get these Office documents out of the solution. So that's just a high-level example of that. This is just a customer success story. This is the sort of the numbers that we can achieve when we're doing these type of large, archiving projects. A very large tile manufacturer in the US engaged with us because they were looking to move to SAP HANA on Business Suite, and just the appliances alone for all their environments was going to cost them around $7.5 million. We reduced that by doing an archiving project to reduce that to 1.5 million, obviously saving them nearly $6 million. So that's a significant saving, and the project was around $250,000. So very good return on investment. And then the next slide is just really to hammer home the impact we can have on appliances. So this is just an example for a SAP HANA, where, for example, the current system is around 3 terabytes. So therefore, sorry, the target size would be around 3 terabytes, which costs about 140K. Now, you then have to multiply that by the number of systems you have, because obviously you need the same appliances for your dev, for your tests, your QA, your pre-prod. So, you know, it soon adds up. So you're around the nearly 600K's worth. Now, just reducing that down to a 1 terabyte system, therefore introducing some archiving, maybe some housekeeping, just getting that down 2 tiers down to a 1 terabyte hits the 62K mark. So therefore you do the maths quite simply. If you go down those 2 tiers and you stay in that second tier, that lower tier, you're saving around 344K. So, you know, it's not difficult to understand the importance of getting control and managing your data. So one last part I wanted to touch on. Part of the audit will also to be looking at what systems can be decommissioned. Okay, so what is decommissioning? So it's a strategic approach for retiring legacy systems and to technologies which could be moved into more cost-effective and easier to manage technologies. And what is a legacy system? So a legacy system is a system that still has active data in it, but you're not actively transacting on that system anymore. So maybe an old SAP system, maybe an old non-SAP systems. But what you can do is we have a tool called Seller where we can decommission that data specifically for legal compliance, process optimization, i.e. if you take a number of legacy systems and put them all into a similar interface, it makes it easier for the users to understand and extract the information, and obviously reduce your total cost of ownership. Like I said, they're probably running on old hardware, expensive hardware which may fail at any time. Would be moving it into more of a better technology, and you would be able to move that technology into something like the cloud to even reduce the costs even further. So that sort of touches on data management and data migration. Data management and data archiving. I'm now going to hand over to Rob Ashby, who's now going to talk about the infrastructure and application strategy. Over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Graham. Very useful stuff there. I'll just take control. Okay. So I'm going to talk a bit about infrastructure, guys, and really this is joining up everything that Graham and David have just talked about. Obviously, David he's looking at licenses from a compliance perspective, make sure you're doing the right things there with SAP, but optimizing. And Graham's looking at the data values. With the infrastructure, obviously we started off probably many customers quite a few years ago now with SAP with a lot of SLAs that are, everything's happy, everything's green, backups and recoveries are being achieved well within the business requirements, and the SAP system is seen as low risk. Users are happy, and the cost to manage is understood. So that's where everybody starts out normally. Move on a number of years, and obviously things start to change, budgets change, people move on, but ultimately the systems grow. And you can see here this example, quite rapidly, in fact, the systems can reach very large sizes very easily. And that starts to impact your SLAs and your, would it take me, if I needed to do a system copy, how long would it take me? All of those things start to be painful to execute. And most importantly, your recovery times and recovery points are potentially impacted by the size of the data, and your risk level goes up, and there's a grumpy guy there not looking too happy. From a performance perspective, that could also be impacted. And obviously with the introduction of HANA, which does compress the database, you get a lot of saving there, but you're still carrying forward a large volume of data that is years and years old, that it probably won't be accessed very often. And as Graham was touching on, it needs to be managed, it needs to be shrunk. It's not getting deleted, it's still available, and it's still available in a performant manner. It's just not living in the most expensive place that it can do to be read. So with this example, if this customer tried to have a HANA machine or move to HANA, they'd need a 9 terabyte physical machine, which, as Graham's example was saying, was something like £630,000. If you then times that by having HA, having DR, and all the non-production requirements, quite quickly the infrastructure becomes very, very expensive, and all your infrastructure costs go up, and obviously the cost to manage do as well. So leading on from what Graham was talking about with archiving, that's a really great start from whether you're already on HANA or not. You may have too much data if you're already there, or you may be able to forecast that you're going to breach your current environment at a certain point in time. This audit will help that. This audit will spell that out and give you more clarity about when that's likely to happen. But in this example, we archive out about 8 terabytes of data, and we start to see the SLAs coming down. We start to get things a little bit better, but still not meeting the business requirement for recovery times, or if you wanted to migrate somewhere, either to the cloud, maybe that's going to take too long with the size of your current system as it is. So it's another reason to shrink the system down and get that data under control. He's put glasses on now, and he's having a closer look at performance, but he's still mediocre. He's not happy, this user. But with some data taken out, you're in a much smaller HANA machine, and it meets the virtual system sizing requirements, because obviously virtualization is great, everybody's doing a little bit of it, but it has its limits in terms of the size of the HANA machines that the hyperscalers or most cloud providers will support. So again, it still needs to be under control. So although we get into this 4 terabyte HANA machine and it's virtualized, if we're going to continue to grow like we did in Graham's graph, then we're going to breach this system quite quickly, and we may end up in a physical machine, which equals a lot of money. So what do? We archive, but we don't just archive, we manage the data on an ongoing basis. So we shrink it down far smaller. Graham and the team look far more at the business data rather than just the volume size, although obviously you can work to a size requirement if you needed to, but the goal is to get as much out of that primary system as you can, get these SLAs back under control, and then you're free to migrate if you wish, or whether that be to cloud or away from cloud, and you start to see your RPO and your risk levels coming back down to where they were. Ultimately though, you've got control over the system. You're continually archiving, which means this size is under control. It's not going to breach, or if it does, it's going to take a lot longer to get there, at which time obviously infrastructure improvements move on. But the goal is obviously keep you out of those larger machines. So what are the key points to realize savings? There's the HANA physical hardware. Obviously it's really expensive. It's driven by RAM, and obviously archiving is going to take the heat out of that for you. SAP want to sell you HANA licenses, of course, so use that to your advantage, and this audit information will empower you to have information that you can present to those guys and work with them to get the right license costs for your business. If you're already on HANA, this audit can still find you savings, of course. The infrastructure stuff alone, you may already be in too large a machine and want to do something about it. You may be about to breach your machine and need to do something about it. But either way, this audit will empower you to take control. Don't forget those business SLAs, of course. We've got to meet those. We've got to be able to restore the system, especially with everything that's gone on in recent times, with people working remotely as well. We need to be able to restore the system in a point in time, and in a short space of time as possible. HANA doesn't have to be the default for all SAP systems. So a lot of customers, just because they have got the HANA licenses, they think they need to roll that out for every application that they have. That's not the case. Obviously, there's other database vendors out there that are supported, namely ASE, but you're minimizing again the infrastructure requirements if you were to use that over a HANA system that has a set size, and it's usually, well, pretty much always larger than an ASE system would be. Savings can be considerable even if HANA is not planned in yet, and archiving will help performance, backups and restores. So one last one, architecture can also deliver additional savings, especially with legacy systems that Graham talked about, because if you're carrying those around, they can be turned off, but the data can still be made available. Okay, so let's begin. The point of the audit was to identify all of those areas across data, licensing and infrastructure. I think it does that very well. It drives projects out of the findings, so you'll get recommendations from the three of us about what you could do, and also we'll prioritize those savings based on the investment required, and help you justify going ahead with it. If we do find a project and you go ahead with it, the audit fee is returned. So the audit fee is handed straight back, so that's good. Obviously each project will have a cost, and but typically its savings are far larger than its cost, as Graham was talking about with his example, and I know David would echo that. And the last one, focus areas are made clear based on the return on investment. So we've said that.